This hour on I-24 News. The ceasefire in northern Syria is officially over. Now Russia will join Turkish troops for joint patrols along the so-called safe zone. Meantime, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad tours the Idlib region. It's his first time in the embattled territory since the start of the Syrian civil war 8 years ago. British lawmakers have rejected a motion to fast-track a new deal on Brexit, making it all but impossible for the UK to leave the European Union by the October 31st deadline.
Tonight, the House has refused to be bounced into debating a hugely significant piece of legislation in just 2 days.
And in Israel, President Reuven Rivlin has announced he will hand the mandate to form a government to blue and white leader Benny Gantz tomorrow night.
From the I-24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with Tal Heinrich and Eric Landskroner.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Tal Heinrich. Eric Landskroner has the night off. The ceasefire in northern Syria had ended with a deal between Russia and Turkey, giving Kurdish forces extra time to withdraw. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Russian leader Vladimir Putin have agreed on the new parameters during a round of marathon talks Tuesday. Kurdish fighters in the area will now have 150 hours to withdraw. Turkish and Russian soldiers will then begin joint patrols of the entire border area, with the exception of the de facto Kurdish capital, Qamishli. The deal appears to also include the contested strategically key town of Manbij, as well as the important Kurdish town of Kobani. Erdogan says he wants to clear the border region of Kurdish fighters and relocate Syrian refugees currently living in Turkey. Before his meeting with Putin, Erdogan threatened to resume his assault on the Kurds if the U.S. promises are not met.
İlgili birimlerimiz sahada süreci devam ediyor.
Meantime, for the first time in years, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad made a rare visit to the front lines of Syria's conflict in Idlib. Assad was surrounded by army commanders and soldiers as he toured the area. During his trip, Assad blasted Erdogan and called him a thief over Turkey's offensive along their shared border. To discuss all these developments in northern Syria, let's bring in international security analyst Martin Himmel. And also joining us is Asaf Romarovsky, a fellow at the Middle East Forum. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Martin, let's start with you. You know, we have a lot to break down here. This new agreement between Turkey and Russia, it seems that it's meant first and foremost to prevent a future clash between Turkey's forces and President Assad's forces, which are backed by Russia. You know, just a few days ago, Assad vowed to protect the Kurds from Turkey. Now, looking at this agreement, he's not really going to keep his promise, right? Asaf, Martin here makes a great point. What do you think is Erdogan's end goal in Syria? Is he really going to stop once all YPG fighters have cleared the so-called safe zone? Or does he have greater aspirations, like Martin refers to him, Ottoman aspirations, like to extend his control, let's say, all the way down to Raqqa and become the liberator of the Sunni rebels against Assad? So, Martin, you said before that Putin is the real winner here, but, I mean, either way, Erdogan, I think he's emerging as the big winner out of all of this, at least for the moment, because he really got what he wanted. You said the Kurds-free zone across Turkey's border. And he can also send back the millions of Sunni refugees into Syria. You know, he talked to President Trump, he met with Putin, and he was somehow able to take advantage of their conflicting interests in Syria. The real master there, no?
Yes, he is a master.
Asaf, this new deal between Turkey and Russia puts one certain focus on, in its Article 6, on Manbij. It says all YPG elements and their weapons will be removed from Manbij. We mentioned that it's a flashpoint city in this entire conflict because it's so close to Aleppo, to Halab, and controlling it guarantees control also of the supply lines from Iraq. Now, even if the Kurdish forces, they do evacuate from this region of Manbij, is it just a matter of time before the next big battle of the Syrian civil war? It could be there, it could be in Idlib. Assad talked about it today, in fact.
Agreed.
And we will talk about the other flashpoint cities like Beirut right now. You mentioned Hezbollah later in the program. Martin Himmel and Asaf Romarovsky, thank you for joining us. Coming up, Israel's Benny Gantz will now get his chance to form a government after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was unable to fulfill his mandate. Short break, and Crossroads will be right back. Welcome back to Crossroads. A new chapter of political history begins in Israel today. President Reuven Rivlin will hand the mandate to Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was forced to return it following weeks of stagnation and negotiations. I-24 News correspondent Jordana Miller is outside Rivlin's residence in Jerusalem with the latest. Thanks to Jordana Miller for that report from Jerusalem. Now that the mandate is being handed to Benny Gantz, he's tasked with the uphill battle of trying to form a government and avoid a third election. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Eli Achenberg has more on the big challenge facing Benny Gantz and the possible scenarios ahead. Eli Achenberg reporting. More political turmoil in Lebanon. For the past week, thousands have taken to the streets following a government proposal to tax WhatsApp calls. So far, the government has reacted mildly to the demonstrations, but this could change if Hezbollah decides to intervene. Our Middle East correspondent Adi Koplovitz with the details. To discuss this further, we're joined by Ryan Morrow. He's a security analyst at the Clarion Project. Ryan, great to see you as always. Before we start talking more specifically about Hezbollah, let's give the people some background here, because citizens of Lebanon, they're out in the streets for days now to protest against corruption and, also the economic solutions that the government has provided to the economic crisis. For them, these reforms are really not enough, and they demand a change. They chant that they want a regime change, but is it deeper than that? Is what they're really asking for a total change of the entire Lebanese political system? But when you're talking about a revolution against the existing political system, can Lebanon, in your view, really exist without the sectarian politics of the country? What's the alternative? I mean, a civil war? They've been there.
New political parties have Shiite leaders who oppose Iran, which is really the strategic opportunity that we have here.
You have it in Iraq, by the way, where we also have seen protests. You have Shiite leaders which are not really in favor of Iranian influence in the country. Some numbers here, Ryan. Lebanon has a national debt of about $85 billion. The unemployment rate among young adults is at 36% reportedly, and the population there keeps growing as the economic growth remains stagnant. How did it happen, though? How did Lebanon get there? And to what extent does Hezbollah play a role? Ryan Moore, thank you for joining us. Question is, how many people will actually point at Hezbollah? In Israel, violent clashes erupted this week between right-wing extremists and IDF soldiers in the West Bank. It's the latest episode in a very sensitive relations between the army and a group of extremist settlers. I-24 News defense correspondent Jonathan Regev has the story. Still ahead here on Crossroads, new reports the Democrats' impeachment effort against President Trump may take longer than expected. And also, we'll talk about the Facebook factor. We'll take a look at the impact of the social media giant on the 2020 campaign, and what do some Democratic hopefuls have to say about it. That's right after the break. Crossroads returns after this. Welcome back to Crossroads here on I-24 News. President Trump is taking his criticism of the impeachment inquiry to another level, sparking outrage in some circles by equating the process to a lynching. This as his top diplomat to Ukraine sat down with House investigators leading the impeachment probe. Mona Kosar-Abdi is in Washington with more. That was Mona Kosar-Abdi reporting. Now let's bring in senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv. Dan, House Democrats said that diplomat Bill Taylor could be the most important witness so far. He was questioned behind closed doors for hours. So what do we know about his testimony? And Dan, what has been the president's reaction on this day to developments in the Democratic impeachment process? Dan, talk to us about the timeline of the impeachment process here. Given the developments, Democrats now predicting it might take longer than initially expected? Senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv, thank you. Now to new evidence about efforts to interfere with U.S. elections. New reports reveal Russia is already working to meddle. Facebook is moving to take down dozens of accounts posing as American, but are actually originating from companies in Moscow. Tom Lamas has the story. To break it down, let's turn to senior national correspondent Michael Shore joining us here on set. Michael, which side of the aisle seems to be more concerned about fake ads, misinformation on Facebook?
Well, as you heard in Tom Lamas's report there, it really is favoring the president at this point.
I saw a headline saying that Mark Zuckerberg actually advised the Pete Buttigieg campaign. What is it about?
The Buttigieg campaign.
So I asked you before the break, in the last debate, Kamala Harris, she called on Twitter to block the president's account. How is it resonating with voters? What has been the reaction? You were there in Ohio.
Yeah, it was sort of a flop.
For now. Michael Shore, senior national correspondent. Thank you. Straight ahead, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wins a narrow victory, but now the hard work begins as he lost his majority in Parliament. And also, violent protests break out across Bolivia as questions are being raised about the results of Sunday's presidential election. We'll break it down. Welcome back to Crossroads on I-24 News. After an especially nasty election campaign in Canada, there is a winner, well, sort of. Justin Trudeau will continue as Prime Minister, but only with the support of a third party in Parliament. Some are saying the results have left Canada more divided than before. Details from our New York Bureau Chief, Steve Langford. And now to Brexit, where on Tuesday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson got some good news and some bad news. The good news for the Prime Minister was that lawmakers, for the first time since Britain chose to leave the EU in 2016, voted in favor of the Brexit plan that he struck with the EU last week. But the bad news is that lawmakers then rejected the fast-track timetable to pass the bill. And late today, European Council President Donald Tusk announced he will recommend that EU grant Johnson's request for a 3-month delay. At one time, the Emperor of Japan was the country's all-powerful ruler. Now is bound by the constitution of one of the world's largest democracies. But as in other countries with kings or queens, Japan's emperor matters as a symbol of the country and as a unifying force. Senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman takes us to a colorful ceremony in the land of the rising sun. That was senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman reporting. Now to Bolivia, where international election monitors expressed concerns over the country's presidential election that was held there on Sunday. Then on Monday, violent skirmishes broke out amid widespread anger over allegations of vote rigging. To break all of this down for us, we're joined by I-24 News correspondent Ariel Hickson. Tall. And Ariel, these violent images that we saw, just part of a bigger wave of protests in other Latin American countries as well?
Absolutely.
Protest resonates one another in a sense. Ariel Hickson, thank you so much. Ronaldinho and other Brazilian soccer legends are coming to Israel for a match against former Israeli soccer stars to promote peace in the region. Our Alec Pollard caught up with some and brings us this report. Now to an ambulance service that started in Israel. It's transforming lives right here in the U.S. United Rescue, or United Hatzalah, responds to medical emergencies through a network of trained volunteers. Correspondent Michelle Devone brings us their story. That does it for this hour of Crossroads, but stick with us here on I-24 News for much more ahead. I'm Tal Heinrich. Thank you for watching. We'll be right back. Shel McQuarrie and Clear Cut next.